The waiting room was full, but no one was here for a routine visit. They sat frozen, whispering about the latest reports, cities locking down, stores being plundered, a breaking news alert that no one wants to believe. Phones vibrate with missed calls and unread messages. The television flickers with headlines that no longer bring comfort, only fear. The world isn't ending yet. Not just yet, but it will soon. No one knows exactly what's coming, only that there's no stopping it, and the clock on the wall sees it all, marking the final hours before life, as they know it, changes forever. Tick, tick, tick. If you enjoy suspenseful stories that help you relax or fall asleep, this could be the perfect one for you. A soothing voiceover, no harsh sounds, just a slow, immersive story to let your mind wander. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. If this one draws you in, tap the like button. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? What time is it for you right now? Leave a comment below. I love hearing where everyone is tuning in from. Now, let's begin. I have always been here, hanging on this wall, ticking, watching. This waiting room was once full of life. People came and went, their conversations blending into a familiar hum beneath my steady rhythm. They sat in these chairs, some impatient, some nervous, some lost in thought. The receptionist would greet them with the same practiced smile, the same words, "Please have a seat. The doctor will see you soon." Time moved forward. I remember the chatter, the shuffle of feet, the crinkling of magazines turned absent-mindedly, the smell of antiseptic and coffee mixed into a familiar scent that lingered in the air. The waiting room was a space of transition, a place between sickness and healing, between uncertainty and answers. The day when the waiting room became too full. The day when the voices became tense, hushed, uncertain. The day when something outside began to change. At first, the change was subtle. The usual sighs of impatience were replaced by whispers, nervous glances exchanged between strangers. The receptionist's phone rang more frequently, her voice growing strained as she answered calls that lasted too long. The television in the corner flickered with breaking news banners that never seemed to end. I remember when the first patient walked in that morning. A woman in her 40s, eyes darting anxiously toward her phone every few seconds. She checked in and sat down, fidgeting with her purse. Then came the young man, his hands stuffed deep into his jacket pockets, his gaze locked onto the TV screen, as though waiting for it to tell him something he wasn't ready to hear. One by one, they arrived. More than usual, too many. Tick. As the hours passed, the tension thickened. People spoke in hushed tones, their words fragmented, lost between my steady beats. They're saying to stay inside. Do you think it's really that bad? I heard the roads are blocked. The receptionist was no longer smiling. She tapped her pen against the desk, the rhythm irregular, uneasy. The phone rang again, and this time, she hesitated before answering. Time itself felt like it had slowed, because I knew something was coming. And yet, I could only tick, tick, Tick. Before the final day, the waiting room was always filled with stories. There was the pregnant woman who once gave birth right here, in the corner, when a snowstorm blocked the roads. Her cries had echoed against the floor. The doctor rushing in just in time to bring life into the world. The baby's first wail had been a moment of joy. The kind of moment that made waiting rooms something more than just places of anxiety. And then there was the man who faked illnesses just for conversation, because he had no one waiting for him at home. He came in with different symptoms every week. A cough, a headache, a pain in his side. The receptionist indulged him, humoring his need to talk. He waited not for a cure, but for a connection. The boy who was afraid of doctors, who always clenched his father's hand, he would shrink into his chair when his name was called, looking up with pleading eyes. His father always knelt beside him, whispering, "It'll be okay, I promise." And somehow, that was enough to make him move. And the old woman who never spoke, but always watched. She sat in the same chair every visit, her thin fingers resting gently on the armrests. She never carried a book, never looked at the television, never fidgeted. She just watched. The people, the receptionist, the door to the doctor's office, as if she was waiting for something more than an appointment, as if she knew something the rest of us didn't. People waited. Some left. Some came back. Some would return with children who had grown taller, with new ailments, with stories of recoveries or new fears. The waiting room was a cycle, predictable, familiar, until it wasn't. Because then, one day, they stopped coming back. The waiting room was never empty, until the day it almost was. They came in without appointments, not for checkups, not for sickness. They just wanted to be inside. The receptionist, always composed, furrowed her brow, but maintained her polite demeanor. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked again and again, but most simply shook their heads. Some mumbled excuses. Others just sat down without answering. The television flickered. News banners scrolled across the bottom of the screen. The text urgent, but the volume was low. Too low. It's happening in other cities first. They wouldn't keep it from us, right? I heard there are roadblocks. A woman with a sleeping child in her lap rubbed her arms, her movements jerky, anxious. A man paced near the window, checking his phone every few seconds, his jaw clenched tight. Another man tried to joke, but his voice wavered, and no one laughed. The receptionist's phone rang, and this time, she hesitated before picking it up. Her face, always composed, paled as she listened. She didn't speak, only nodded. Then she stood and disappeared into the back office. No one called the next patient. The waiting room, once buzzing with conversations and the rustle of paper, had gone quiet. Too quiet. The television flickered again. The image was unsteady, the colors muted. The news anchor's face looked tight, strained, as though she had been talking for too long without rest. "We are advising all residents to remain where they are. Emergency measures are being implemented." A red banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. The letters blurred as someone turned the volume up slightly. The words were clear now. Breaking news. National state of emergency declared. People turned toward the screen. Someone stood up. Someone else grabbed their phone. And then, suddenly, the screen cut out. Static. For the first time, even I faltered. A man near the door stood up. He walked toward the exit and reached for the handle. It did not move. He frowned, pulling again, more forcefully this time. Nothing. His breath hitched. He turned back toward the room, searching for reassurance. Why is this locked? The receptionist's hands gripped the desk. Her knuckles whitened. It's probably just jammed, someone suggested, though their voice lacked confidence. The man rattled the handle. Louder this time. A woman gasped. The child in her lap stirred. "Let me try," another voice said. A second man, taller, broader, approached the door. He placed his palm flat against it, tested the handle, pushed his shoulder against it. No movement. Murmurs spread. That's not right. Who locked us in? Is this part of the protocol? The receptionist was standing now, eyes darting toward the hallway where the doctor's office lay. But no one was coming. Something had changed. For the first time, fear became something tangible in the waiting room. A woman by the window pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. Outside, the street looked too still. No cars. No movement. What is happening? The television remained static. No new reports. No updates. The room had become too quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't just stillness, but expectation. Like everything was holding its breath. The clock ticked, marking each second as they passed. But the sound was swallowed by something heavier, something inevitable. The waiting room was silent, but the air was thick with tension. People sat stiffly in their seats, their backs rigid, their eyes locked on the door to the doctor's office. No one had been called in for hours. And then, the receptionist spoke. Daniel Ford? A man, sitting closest to the door, looked up sharply. For a moment, he didn't move. His eyes flickered to the receptionist, then to the rest of the waiting room. No one spoke. Daniel Ford? She repeated, softer this time. He hesitated. His fingers curled against the fabric of his pants, knuckles pale. The name echoed in the stillness, as if the walls themselves were listening. Daniel swallowed. He glanced around one last time, searching for something. Reassurance. An answer. Anything that would tell him this was still just a normal day. His movements were careful, deliberate, as though stepping out of his chair would set something in motion that could never be undone. He exhaled and walked toward the door. It creaked as the receptionist pushed it open, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. The doctor's office. He stepped inside. The receptionist closed the door behind him. And then, nothing. No footsteps beyond the threshold. No voices. No rustling of paper or shifting of chairs. The waiting room held its breath. The door did not open again. The receptionist did not call another name. The clock continued to tick, but everything else stood still. People exchanged uneasy glances. Someone shifted in their seat, and then, one by one, they stopped looking at the door. The waiting room had never been this quiet. No phones were ringing. The receptionist's desk phone sat in its cradle, the blinking red light signaling unheard messages. But she did not pick it up. She did not move. No news played on the television. The last broadcast cut short mid-sentence. A woman in the farthest seat let out a soft, shuddering breath, then a sob. She pressed a hand to her mouth, as if she could hold it in, as if breaking the silence might make things worse. No one comforted her. A child, barely old enough to understand, tugged at his mother's sleeve. His small voice broke the heavy air. "Can we go home now?" His mother swallowed hard, her lips parting as though she wanted to answer. But no words came. A man stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced the length of the room, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane. They can't just keep us here." No one responded. He turned toward the receptionist. "When is the doctor coming out?" She didn't answer. She didn't look at him. She simply sat, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze locked on the closed door to the doctor's office. A few moments later, the man sat back down. A woman near the window clenched her fists, staring outside. The world beyond the glass was eerily still. No cars, no pedestrians, just empty roads stretching endlessly. "Something's wrong." A whisper of agreement. A man near the door tried the handle again. It did not move. "We can't just wait here." But that was exactly what they did. The receptionist's hands trembled slightly. She squeezed them into fists and placed them on the desk. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her practiced calm had slipped away, leaving something raw in its place. The waiting room had become something else now. A cage, a limbo, and all they could do was wait. The child sniffled, clutching his mother's arm. His mother still didn't answer. No one did. The receptionist was the first to go. It happened without ceremony. She simply stood, slowly gathering her things, smoothing the creases in her blouse. Then she walked to the door. The same door that hadn't opened in hours. She pulled the handle, and to everyone's surprise, it gave way. It wasn't locked anymore. Or maybe it never had been. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye. She stepped outside into the empty world beyond the glass, and she did not look back. One by one, some left in pairs, others left alone, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. The mother clutched her child's hand tightly as she walked out, the little boy still asking, "Can we go home now?" The man who had tried the door so many times didn't hesitate this time. He shoved his hands into his pockets and strode out without a word. The waiting room emptied slowly, like sand draining through an hourglass. Except for one. He sat by the window, staring outside, unmoving. His fingers tapped against his knee, a slow rhythm matching my own. He was the last. He had arrived early that morning, when the room was still filled with noise, when the world outside still made sense. And now, he was alone with me. The sky beyond the window darkened. Streetlights flickered weakly against the empty roads. Still, he didn't move. Hours passed. The world outside changed, but he remained, lost in thought, lost in waiting. And then finally he sighed, a deep, tired breath. He stood, adjusted his coat, took one last look at the empty chairs, the silent desk, the darkened screen, and then he, too, was gone. The door swung shut behind him with a gentle click, and I was alone. For the first time in my existence, I was the only thing left in the waiting room. The lights hummed softly overhead, their glow dim and flickering. The air was still. No one was coming back. I waited, because it was all I knew how to do. I listened for the sounds of cars, for voices, for something, anything that might tell me what happened to the world outside. But there was only silence. And I remained, the only thing still moving, the only thing still keeping time, in a place where time no longer mattered. No one ever returned. I have waited, marking the time as I always have, listening for footsteps that never come, for voices that have long since disappeared. The outside world is silent. The air is heavy with dust, undisturbed by movement. I do not know what happened beyond these walls. I do not know if the world still exists. I only know that I am here, and I am still ticking. Did the end already come? Or is it still waiting? Just like me. The walls that once carried the echoes of conversations are now empty of sound. The door that swung open 1,000 times a day now remains still. I try to listen, but there is nothing left to hear. Nothing except for me. I do not know how long I have been alone. The lights flicker dimly, weaker than before. The air is still, heavier now, thick with dust that swirls unseen. The waiting room has not changed, yet I can feel that something is different. I have counted the seconds, the minutes, the days, but time has lost its meaning. There is no one left to follow it, no one left to listen. I was made to mark time, to measure the past, to carry the present, to lead toward the future. But what is a future with no one left to meet it? I listen, hoping, straining, waiting for something, anything. But all I hear is silence pressing against my steady rhythm, swallowing my sound, dragging me into its weightless void. The power flickers. The weak glow of the lights sputters, casting long, stretched shadows across empty chairs. My pointers slow, as though fighting against something unseen, as though resisting what is coming. There was once life here. There was once sound, movement, laughter, worry, the occasional argument over a delayed appointment. There were people. Where did they go? Did they find what they were looking for? Did they leave by choice? Or did the world outside demand their silence, just as it is demanding mine? I feel it now. The pull, the slow drain of energy, the certainty that even I cannot last forever. My pointers hesitate, then push forward, sluggishly, reluctantly. The weight of emptiness presses down, pressing against my gears, forcing them to stall. Slower now. The silence grows heavier. Time has been abandoned, and I am no longer needed. The final moments stretching longer than they should, as if even time itself does not want to end. And then, nothing. No final breath. No goodbye. No dramatic collapse. Only silence. An absence where sound once was. And the waiting room is finally, completely still.